Hi everyone! Welcome back to This Book Belongs to Pam, and let's talk about all the books that I read for the month of August and for Akdang Pinoy Readathon. Whew! I hope that this setup works. I'm trying to figure out how to film at night so I have more freedom and option to film, and I stopped blaming the lack of natural light for not filming. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. The point is to talk about the books that I read in August. August is a special month because for us, it is Buwan ng Wika, where we are focusing on our native language. For me, that is Filipino Tagalog. And so I have joined Akdang Pinoy Readathon, which was hosted by Kat from Kat Angelico and Sai, the engineer, is reading. I will leave their Instagrams below in the description box. In total, in August, I read 7 books, but I'm gonna talk about 8 books because one of the Akdang Pinoy books that I read, I finished it in September, but pretty much read most of it in August. I'm just gonna lump them all on this recap. And I'm also not gonna be doing stats anymore. I feel like I want to do them in bigger chunks, like half a year or maybe every quarter, because I feel like that makes it more interesting. Like monthly stats, I don't really read a lot of books to make monthly stats interesting. So I've decided to just scrap the stats and do that like in a quarterly or maybe just a yearly fashion. But that's not really like, you know, super important. So we're here to talk about the books. So let's talk about said books. The first book that I read for this month is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So this is the first book in the Drowning Empire series. So I read this book because of a video collaboration that I did with Sash from Sash Reads. I will link that video down below. Essentially, Sash picked out 3 books for me to read, and I tried to sort of figure out which one she liked and which one she didn't. So go to that video. I want to find out if I guessed correctly. But let me tell you my thoughts about the book. So in The Bone Shard Daughter, we are in this world where bone magic exists. The empire governing this country, they collect bone shards from, I think it was like 8-year-olds. Like when you turn 8, there's this tithing ceremony where you are obligated to offer up a shard of bone, I think from the base of your skull. And this is something that a lot of the constituents of this empire absolutely detest. The current emperor has the ability to use the bone shards to power this thing called constructs. We are following a couple of different people. So one of them is, as you guess it, the daughter, the Bone Shard Daughter. So we are following her as she is learning how to wield this bone shard magic, but we know pretty early on that something happened to her. She got sick and she kind of forgot in her memories. And then on the other hand, we're also following this guy who is a smuggler. So he is a very famous smuggler, but one day in this island where a tithing ceremony is actually happening, he was consigned to smuggle not an object but a child. He smuggles a child, but then something unthinkable happened. The island begins to sink. He was able to get away, and then while they were trying to escape, he comes across this weird creature that for some reason, I've forgotten what the creature was actually described like, but I can only imagine this creature as Momo from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And this creature is kind of weird, kind of has some magical powers to it, and whenever the smuggler is with this creature, he kind of gets those powers. There are also a couple of other POVs as well in different settings, so there's a lot happening as you can see. But I think that sort of like gives you a gist of like the mysteries that we might unfold in this book. I like the book in a general kind of way. Like I enjoyed the ideas of magic that it had and the very different worlds that the characters are living in. So there's very distinct islands and distinct like settings in this book, and I actually really enjoyed that. For some reason, I just really could not connect with any of the characters in the book. Like I do not feel anything for them, so that when things happen, when the plot progress, I was not affected at all, and I think that kind of affected my ability to enjoy this book. There were so many plot twists and turns. Some of it I guessed, but I don't know, I just was not as invested in this book. But I think it also has to do with the fact that I was coming off of a pretty severe reading slump where I wasn't really enjoying a lot of the books that I was reading. And this was quite a proper fantasy. There's so many words that are new, there's so many places, so many different magics that are happening. And maybe I was just not in the right headspace to read something like that. So I kind of checked out, and honestly, for the last maybe quarter of the book, I kind of skimmed it a little bit. Like the writing style, to me, it's not my favorite. I felt it was kind of dry and overwritten a little bit, and it kind of just meandered a lot. So I lost focus pretty fast while reading. So with that said, I have given this book 2.75 stars. If you want to see my, I guess, more real-time reactions to the book, I will leave a link again to that collaboration video that I did with Sash. I had a lot of fun filming that, so check that out if you want, you know, more updates about this book. Me giving it 2.75 doesn't mean that I'm not gonna continue the series. I actually was intrigued by the plot twist towards the end of the book and the cliffhanger that we were left on. So I am definitely interested in reading the sequel. The next couple of books that I'm going to be talking about are books I read for the Full Moon Readathon, which is a readathon hosted by Jan Agathon. I actually did a full-on reading vlog for this, so I will leave a link to that below as well. So I'm gonna start with Gallant by V.E. Schwab. So this is V.E. Schwab's middle grade book. I don't know if this is her first, I'm not quite sure, but this book has been in my TBR for such a long time because I pre-ordered it, but I never picked it up for some reason. So this is a middle grade fantasy slash light horror, and I believe it has been compared quite a bit to Coraline because it has the concept of parallel worlds. In this book, we are following a little girl, Olivia Pryor, and she's an orphan. She's also mute, and she can see ghosts. So Olivia, because of all of those things, has been bullied quite a bit in this orphanage. So she's very solitary, and she essentially does not like her life within the orphanage. One day, she gets a very mysterious but also exciting letter where she finds out that she actually still has relatives. So this man, I think his name was Arthur Pryor, sends her a letter and essentially tells her to come home to Gallant, which is apparently a family home, and it is also where her mom lived before her mom left her in the orphanage. So she's very curious and she accepts. She moves to Gallant, which is this old dilapidated house. Like, it seems like a house that was once very grandiose, but now it's just old, dilapidated, and there's only 3 people living there. 2 caretakers and the son of Arthur Pryor, the man who wrote to her, because Arthur was apparently already dead at this point. So we sort of start to find out like what happened in Gallant, why was Olivia left in an orphanage, what happened to her mother. As she explores Gallant, there's a lot of secrets to be found, and that includes a parallel Gallant, another Gallant in another dimension, if you will. And she, ever the curious little girl, tries to explore that and solve the mystery of this house. I think that is why it has been compared a lot to Coraline, because of that parallel house dimension thing, but I actually think that it's not the same at all in terms of content. This one felt truly like a middle grade fantasy, whereas Coraline felt more of like a philosophical existential story, like exploring a lot of those type of questions. But this one is really, it still has a little bit of that, but it's really more about the fantasy and a little child exploring all of that. I enjoyed this in the sense that I loved V.E. Schwab's writing. V.E. Schwab describing this old house, the eeriness, the once beauty of the house, the concept of shadows, of light and dark, and how those two, you know, intermingle. V.E. Schwab is such a master at that. And it is so good to read. There's so many lines here that are very quotable. Like, it made me feel something, but honestly, the plot and the characters, I could care less for. Like, it's a very straightforward, simple, and the characters they're not complex at all to me, and that really made me not care at all for what's happening. So if you want something that has really good writing, very straightforward plot, very decent set of characters, they're not exceptional, they're not the most complex, but they're not bad, then I would still recommend this one because it still has all of the vibe. It's a lot of atmosphere and vibe, and I think V. Schwab does such a great job at creating atmosphere. And I actually really want to read more horror, like gothic horror from her. I feel like she's gonna write that really well. So maybe in the future she's gonna have more of that, which I'm very, very interested in. But for Gallant, I gave this one 3 stars. The next book I read is a modern classic, which is very rare for me. I don't really read a lot of classics or even modern classics, but I read Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. So this is a modern classic, and Lispector is a Brazilian author. She was originally from Ukraine and she moved to Brazil. And I really did not know what to expect when I picked this book up. I just heard about Lispector from Leah Crumpton's videos. She loves Clarice Lispector. So I got curious and I just, you know, did a little Google search, like what's the best first book from Clarice Lispector, and this was kind of what people recommended because it's very short. It's 70 pages, and they say that it also captures her writing style really well. So it's like a good introduction to Lispector's work. And I agree, even though I haven't read any other works by her, but I agree that this is a good place to start because I absolutely love this book. And I do not know what to tell you about what this book is about. Even in the vlog that I did for Full Moon Readathon, I struggled a lot. But this is essentially just an author, like a writer within the book, writing the story of this little girl. But rather than just tell us the story, he kind of like fumbles, breaks the fourth wall. It's like he's talking to us, conversing with us about what this little girl is gonna do, but then he never really gets around to telling us. He does tell us a little bit about the difficulties that this girl went through because she's poor and she kind of has a very different way that she sees the world, and the writer wants to tell us about that, but he kind of forgets and he just tells us that, oh, you're gonna love this story, or oh, you're gonna feel sorry for her, but we don't know why, but we kind of do as well. Like, I have no idea how to describe this book, but one thing is that it is very funny to me, and it's also very hard-hitting. Like, it has a lot of reflections on life and what's worth living, and there's so many like really good lines in here that I have started underlining. I don't underline my books, but I did for this one just because there's so many good lines, and I highly recommend it. Like, I really don't know how to talk about this book right now. Like, I don't know how to, you know, express it in a synopsis. It's only 70 pages, including like all of the author's note, translator's note, and things. So I recommend that you just read it. Just be prepared for it to be very odd and very all over the place, but because that seems to be the point. I gave this one 5 stars, and I don't know why, but I feel like that's the only rating that I can give this book. 5 stars. Clarice Lispector's Hour of the Star. The last book that I read for Full Moon Readathon is also the first book that I read for Akdang Pinoy Readathon, or Filipino Literature Readathon, and that is The Quiet Ones by Glenn Diaz. This is a literary fiction where we are following 5 pairs of people, 5 couples if you will, and the common thread among these people is that they all worked in this call center. One day, one of them figured out a way to essentially embezzle a bunch of money from their call center clients to their own pockets and make them very, very rich. So I initially thought that we were gonna be following them as they try to do the heist, figured out how to get away and, you know, not get caught, and how they're gonna use that money. But very quickly, I found out that that's not the case. Each couple that we're following here kind of has like a different story, but it all somehow has to do with the relationship between Filipinos that are in that call center and foreigners, mostly like Western foreigners. My first impressions about this book is not good. I really had a hard time going through the first section where we are following Alvin and Scott. Alvin is the call center agent that figured out this whole trick with embezzling money and stuff. But his section was written so pretentiously that I found it really hard to get through. Like, it was like 115 or something like that pages of just him pontificating about every single thing, and he does it in such a pretentious way, and I just don't know if that was necessary to get the point across, and it just made me very, very, very disinterested about this character. However, after that section, everything else I really enjoyed. I feel like it really explored the relationships between Western employers and local Filipino workers, which there's always gonna be some kind of like power imbalance in there, and that also kind of harks back to colonialism and how we are kind of very America coded and how we think of Americans or Western people as like better than us, as our bosses rather than as, you know, another human being. And it really explores that in the different configurations of couples or partners that we have in this book, and I really enjoyed it. It's also set in 2007 and 2008, which is such a different time. One thing that was quite surprising in here is like the presence of a bunch of like slur words, especially like the F word used for gay people, and it's definitely wasn't used haphazardly. It wasn't just put there for shock value. It was definitely used to show that one of these characters had very demeaning thoughts of someone from the gay community. Something to take note of if that is something that will be triggering for you. I gave this book 3.75 stars, and I think it could have been higher if that first section, that first 100 pages wasn't written the way it was, because it was just such a slog to get through, and for it to be the first part of the book, especially since I'm coming off of the assumption that this was kind of like a thriller, that combination didn't bode well for my enjoyment of this book. Other than that, I really actually did enjoy it. That is The Quiet Ones by Glenn Diaz. Now, the next book that I read, which is the second book that I read for Akdang Readathon, is Second Chance Books by Karina Gaskell. This is a romance novel that is indie published as well. And I initially bought it because I wanted to buy more books by Filipino authors, especially ones that are published locally. And I mean, it's just so cute. It also says Second Chance Books, or there's high chance that there's books, libraries, bookstores involved, and I was right. It also came with a kind of like a bookmark of the map, which is handy. So we followed Nell. She's working for this real estate company. They're trying to take over a bunch of businesses in order to create condominiums, malls, all of those things. So capitalism versus small town, that kind of vibe. And one of the businesses that they want to buy is a bookstore, a secondhand bookstore, where this guy, what is his name? Tom, where Tom is working. Now, Nell and Tom, they actually know each other from way back because Nell's mother used to clean for Tom's house because Tom is quite rich. His father is a popular musician, but Tom has since run away from home and is living in this second-hand bookstore called Second Chance Books. So Nell is in a pickle because her sister was just left by her brother-in-law. Were they married? I forget. And her sister's pregnant, so she doesn't have a job. A baby's coming. Nell is now the sole breadwinner for her family. And she decides that she's gonna take up this job. She's gonna try to get the owner of Second Chance Books to sell the bookstore to the real estate agency so that she can get the commission. So she does that by infiltrating the Second Chance Bookstore. She goes in there, works as a, I don't know what to call her. She basically just organizes the shelves. I guess she's like a bookseller in a way. She's gonna work as a bookseller so that she could get to know the owner more, kind of figure out what the owner needs in order for him to agree to selling the bookstore, because everything that they throw at him, like blank check and all, he has refused. So there must be something, and that is what Nell is there to figure out. However, she meets Tom, and that just made things a lot more complicated. It's very cute, it's very simple, very straightforward. The characters are very cookie cutter stereotypes. It feels like a Hallmark movie in a book. But that doesn't mean that it's not enjoyable. I definitely enjoyed it, and I kind of like teared up in some of the parts, especially towards the end when they were talking about what the bookstore means to them. But it's definitely a book that you just read once and never think about again. I think I enjoyed it when I was reading it, and I definitely recommend it if you want something lighthearted, straightforward, like I said, the Hallmark movie. This one I gave 3 stars. The third book that I read for that readathon is My Lola's Love Letters by Ines Bautista Yao. This book is, I would say, like a romance novel with a little bit of family drama. Well, not really. I think romance is, like contemporary romance is more like it. In this book, we are following Nat Torres, and she is a college junior. She is going through an internship at a school trying to become a teacher, but she's very frustrated because she feels like nothing is working in her favor. She was recently in a toxic relationship with this guy that I've forgotten the name of. She's in a toxic relationship. I think the guy's name was Gabe. I don't quite remember. Toxic relationship 100%, because this guy has just been stringing her along, using her, and then just dumping her for another girl. And then when that girl disappeared, he tried to go back to her. Just all around douchebag. He has always made her feel very small and that she's not skilled enough, that she's stupid. But for some reason, this girl Nat thinks that this, I don't know, sunshine comes out from his ass. We're just following her as she tries to figure out what to do with this relationship, because she is hopelessly obsessed with this guy, until one day while cleaning the attic in her grandmother's place that she finds a box of letters. And these are letters that one of her grandmother's sister, sent to her grandmother when they were in the same age as hers. Like letters detailing her relationship, especially in such a different time. When they were younger, you had to have a chaperone. You can't just be seen with a guy alone. It's like very traditional and conservative. So she kind of gets to relive her grandmother's love stories, and that gives her perspective about her own relationship. This book, in theory, would be such a light-hearted, kind of heartwarming type of book, but I kind of hated it. Like, I was reading this and I was absolutely annoyed by Nat, this main girl. Like, she is just insufferable to me. She's just so annoying. Everything that happens in this book is very cliche and it's very cheesy, and I just really did not enjoy my time reading it. The only thing that I enjoy about this are the love letters by the grandmother. Like, reading those love letters gave me a glimpse as to how the author could write. I kind of wonder, like, is the letter written by a completely different author? Because the rest of the book is just so juvenile in a bad way. Unfortunately, I gave this one 2 stars. The next book that I read for Akdang Pinoy Readathon, which is actually also the last book that I finished in August, is The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanson. I have been dying to read this ever since I got it, since publication, because this is the Fairy Loot editions. I got it with the Fairy Loot adult box, and I even posted an unboxing of it on my Instagram. So look at how pretty she is. I have been wanting to read this, but for some reason, because it's a fantasy and I know that it's gonna be a series, I subconsciously wanted to at least wait for announcement of the sequel before I picked it up, because I knew that I would be annoyed if I had to wait like a full year for it. Thankfully, the sequel, A Moonson Rising, is gonna come out, I think, in December or in January, so not too long now. So in the Hurricane Wars, we are following Taliesin, and she is a soldier for the Sardovian Allfold. But Taliesin is special because she is the last known, at least, light weaver. So she has the ability to command light and use that in battle. And they are going up against Kesath and the Shadow Forge Legion, headed by Emperor Gaheris and his son Alaric Osinas. So he is essentially one of the best Shadow Forge ever, so he's like a power to be reckoned with. They met in the battlefield, and something happens where Taliesin and his crew was forced to leave and seek shelter elsewhere. I feel like anything more will be a spoiler, but the thing that I really enjoyed in this one is, first of all, the magic system. While it is very rooted in the typical magic system, which is elemental, the way that they call forth and use their magic is quite unique. It all revolves around the idea of hurricane, which is like the hurricane war. So the way that they use their magic, they create things like storm ships, which has the ability to manipulate weather. They use their magic to power this flying sails thing. Like all of their like mode of transportation, their like fighter jets are essentially boats that can fly. And they use their magic to power those boats, and everything has to do with wind, with the storm, with rain, and I just really enjoyed that. If you didn't know, Thea Guanzon is a Filipino author, so there are a lot of Filipino culture, Filipino folktale in this one, and I really liked how she incorporated them in a not so straightforward way, but if you know the story, if you know the culture, if you know the folktale, you're gonna see it in the story, which I really enjoyed. And this is fantasy romance. I mean, it's kind of obvious that it's fantasy romance. Thing with Alaric and Taliesin that I absolutely enjoyed is that it's essentially a slow burn, knife to throat, enemies to lovers romance. You really are kind of like hoping for just a sliver of something, because they have all of this tension, which Thea Guanzon wrote so well. Like they have this tension that's happening partly because they have very opposing powers, they're from very opposing empires, and they have very different beliefs about things, but at the same time they also have a similar goal in mind, so they kind of clash about how to get to that goal, and they also have to work together at some point. And it just really is the epitome of a slow burn, knife to throat, enemies to lovers romance. So if that's what you're looking for, you're gonna get it in the Hurricane Wars. The ending I really enjoyed. We kind of got a reward for a slow burn, but it's still just a tiny thing. Like she didn't give us everything, so I feel like in the next book Thea Guanzon is just gonna absolutely rip us to shreds and break our hearts. So I'm very excited. So I gave this one 4 stars. My only gripe with this book is it feels a tad bit overwritten, especially with the descriptions of things. I like fantasy books that are very descriptive because it does help me imagine the scene, especially when they're talking about made up stuff. It helps me imagine it, but sometimes it can be overwritten in a sense that we're just using synonyms of words to make it longer, when a more succinct description would have done the same thing, have the same effect. And I kind of got a little bit distracted because of that. Like I couldn't fully immerse because I keep noticing that everything was just overwritten. And it did get better towards the middle because we've already finished describing the stuff, and now we can move on to like the plot of it all. We don't really need like a lengthy description of their ships, of them, how their magic manifests, because she's already done that in the beginning. So it did get better, and the pacing felt better towards the middle part of the book. And I think it's not such a big deterrent, but that is the reason why I knocked off a star. So this one is 4 stars, and I'm very excited to read the next book. The final book that I read for Akdang Readathon, I started on the last day, I think, of August, but I finished it September 1st. It is Para Kay B by Ricky Lee. Now, this book, initially I thought was like 5 love stories, maybe more contemporary and literary fiction, like different kinds of love stories. And it is that, but it's also weird. It kind of reminds me of the book that I was talking about earlier, which is Hour of the Star, where you have the author of the book talking to you about the book, and there's just so many weird things that happen here that I actually really like. We are given 5 different love stories because this author, the writer of the love stories inside this book, is trying to prove his theory on love, where he essentially says that for every 5 couples that are in love, only one of them will end up happy. So he's kind of trying to showcase that by sharing 5 love stories. And the love stories in here, I was expecting just, contemporary, real world stories, but this one has quite a bit of magical realism to it, which I was not expecting at all. Like, nowhere in this cover, in this line at the back, in the synopsis, or what even is that? It's not even a synopsis. In the inside flap, nothing gave me the feeling that it was gonna be magical realism, but I actually really liked how it was explored. It was really fun to read, and the writing style is very casual. It's written in Taglish, which is a mix of Tagalog and English, so it's very much true to like how we would converse day to day. I don't know, I just really enjoyed this one. Like, I don't know how to talk about this. Just know that it's 5 love stories that are interconnected somehow, and they all have a little bit of magical realism into it. And then the ending is just bonkers. It feels like one of those weird movies that you watch where you don't know what's happening towards the end, but you keep on watching because you're like just glued to it and you just want to see it through to the end. That's what the ending felt like for me. I think it all boils down to whether or not you're up for magical realism, but I do think it does explore romance and relationship, or more vaguely like love, quite well. And a lot of the experiences here are very Filipino experiences, which I definitely appreciated. So that is Para Kay B by Ricky Lee. Para Kay B just means 4B. I gave this book 4.25 stars. There you have it. These are all of the books that I read for the month of August. I mean, obviously one of them I finished in September, but whatever, nobody really cares. I had such a good time. It's a weird reading month for me. I had some mini slumps here and there, especially after I read this book. I kind of got into like a mini reading slump. It's very obvious in my story graph, line graph thing of my daily reading. After I read this, I went into a reading slump, which was not good. But I did finish my Akdang Pinoy TBR. I read 5 books for that, and I'm quite happy with that. I succeeded, and these are all the books that I read. So it's been a good reading month, especially because I did get a 5-star read, and I also read 5 books by Filipino authors. My goal is to read at least 1, and I read 5 for this month, so that's a good thing. I will link again all of the vlogs that I mentioned down below, as well as details on Akdang Pinoy, which is a year-long project actually by Kat and Sai. So there's more to come on that. I will link their Instagram down below as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and letting me yap about books. September is gonna be a crazy month. I've already finished reading 2 books, and it's Magical Readathon month, so I'm gonna have to read a lot more. I will leave a link to my TBR for that as well. Again, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!
Baby